Hi, everyone. I'm Gold Derby News and Features Editor Ray Richmond, and I'm here today with Safowa Bright Bitzelberger, who received an Emmy nomination for her period costumes in the six-part Netflix biographical crime drama Griselda, starring Sofia Vergara. Safowa, I am not surprised you got nominated because your costumes really stand out as almost a character in themselves in this series. Let's start by talking about your thought process and how you curated Sofia's wardrobe as Griselda.
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, Ray. It's wonderful. So thank you for having me. And it was a huge process. I mean, for a number of reasons. One was because it's a period project, and you really have to nail all of the aesthetics and styles from both eras, from the 70s and from the 80s. I think that it was a transformative role for her, externally, definitely, and so we wanted to honor that. I think that the other challenge was because despite her notoriety and immense wealth, of course, at the top of her game in her cartel, the reality is that that group, that community, are really a fringe. They're the underbelly, right? So there's immense wealth and power, but at the same time, these people, because of the path that they've chosen and they're in cartels, they are not on a red carpet. They're not having photographs taken of them, at least at that time period. And aside from law enforcement related photos, on a scene arresting someone, or a mugshot, or a picture in court, there really were not as many resources as one would think because of the level that she reached. And this is across the board. So what my team and I did is we really delved deep with using every resource possible, whether it was media, movies, periodicals, magazines, catalogs, photographs from people within the community, at that time, Colombians in Miami, both eras. But what we did is it was sort of like a reverse engineering. So with the few pictures that we had of her, we went with the direction that with her, especially as she rose in power. It was not about style, like trends and such. It was really about power. And of course, she raised her game and had a more elevated look as she moved forward. But we really didn't want the clothes to wear her. We wanted her to wear the clothes without sounding corny. And so it really was a tool to help her get into character. And although she does wear prosthetic makeup and wigs and teeth and eyebrows and prosthesis, we didn't have any padding on her or anything to really change her from the neck down. It was even her posture. It was the way that she carried herself, all of those things. And also, since we really wanted to steer away from the person that we're used to seeing Sofia as, and this was paramountly important to her, that it wasn't about being overtly sexy or distracting. And it really was about becoming Griselda. And although she did use her feminine wiles, yes, at the beginning especially, right. I think it really was about focusing on her performance and her becoming that La Jefa, La Jefa, the boss.
And it wasn't easy making Sofia Vergara look semi-plain. I mean, this woman is just so beautiful. But I mean, obviously, with your costumes and the gowns and things that you gave her, yeah. You obviously gussied her up. But so my understanding, Safowa, was that you were hired first as the costume supervisor, right? But it evolved into designer. How did that happen? Did it require kind of a switch from logistical to creative?
It did. We were fortunate because of a number of reasons, and because of the time we were shooting, we had an extremely long amount of prep, and we started at the end of the summer, right before the fall of 21, and we had planned to start shooting in January, and so we had a great amount of prep, and I was brought on as supervisor, which is such a logistical position. It really is about clearing the path for the designer to be able to be creative and bringing everything in. And it was a tall order because of this project and the scale and the multiple periods all the custom made, all of that. And so actually, once we started shooting right at the beginning of the year in January, the designer decided to move on, and the studio, the producers in the studios came to me and said, "Would you like to take over? We know you can do this, and we know you have a background in design, even though you've been focusing on supervision." And I initially said, "No, no, how can I pass this off? No, you know." And I thought about it, and I decided that I thought it was very important to have some continuity within the department, creatively, for the actors, for Sophia, for our director, and I just thought it was an amazing project. So I wanted to do whatever I could do to support it and to protect the crew, and
Sure.
and just it was a big enough project that I didn't want to add an extra level to it. But it was, I gave an example to someone. I'm dating myself, but it's like the scene on Footloose where he has one foot in one car and one foot in another, and they're driving down a highway and you're straddling two things. And that's really what it felt like. It felt like you really were, while the horse was moving, right? You're switching onto another horse. And because we had just started shooting barely a couple weeks before, it wasn't like I could press the pause button. You just have to make it work. And I think it was a challenge, but I'm really glad I did it. And I'm very grateful. I think it turned out great.
It did. And how could you be old enough to remember Footloose? I'm sorry. No, you have one of those ageless faces, but I digress. I wanted to actually just very briefly, before we move forward, Safowa, describe that Griselda stars Vergara in the lead role as the notorious real-life Colombian drug queenpin, Griselda Blanco, who ruled over the cocaine boom in the U.S. in the 1970s and 80s. What kind of understanding of 80s, I think maybe you grew up in the 80s, your understanding of 80s designer fashion before taking the job?
Oh, well, I am dating myself. I have a great understanding of 80s fashion, and I was a kid and teenager during that time period, and and my mother was chic as they come. She was really chic, and so I think I leaned into a lot of the silhouettes that she wore, and of course I was glued to the TV during that time period, right? So even if I shouldn't have been watching Dynasty, somehow I did watch it. Even if I shouldn't have been watching Miami Vice, I know I would not let my child, who's 10 right now, watch those shows. But I was very much aware of all of the aesthetics across the board. And so absolutely. And I think that's also a time when more of the, I think that design became a little more accessible, right? And because of what the 80s symbolized, and it was, very materialistic, and our country was, at the top of its game in many ways. And I think that in general, I definitely imagined where she would evolve into aesthetically. And it was my jam in many ways, without sounding corny, but definitely. And it was very satisfying to get a lot of that out of my system. So it was great.
I could tell that you really did. That really was kind of your territory, based on just how well this turned out and how beautiful it was. I mean, one of the things I loved about it, Safowa, was, how Griselda, her character in the show, what she wore kind of matched her status as a power broker, or less, year by year, and how the clothes really sort of matched that. And I meant, so that really was kind of a storytelling element to this, wasn't it? That you really were talking about where she was on the food chain of life, and on the food chain of cocaine, based on what she was wearing.
Absolutely. I mean, when, clearly at the beginning of the story, when we see her in Colombia escaping her husband, right? She's killed her husband. She escapes with the kids, a few outfits, her jewelry, giant brick of cocaine to seed money, right? As something to seed her business. And when she landed in Miami, she really had to take a little bite of humble pie, step back. Even though she had grown up with very, very little means, she had reached a certain level and she had to sort of start over. She had to start over, absolutely. And so you see that evolution in what she's wearing, and her making it work within the parameters and the boundaries of what level she's at, right? And as we see her move up, I think that it's definitely reflected in what she was wearing, and but still honoring the fact that we didn't want it to pull too much from what the role that she was going to take on. And I think that that's also why we see the way that we approached her evolution, especially as she moved up and was at the top of her game, is we decided that she's different. She's a female. She's not going to try and dress like a man, right? So it's not like you suddenly see her as La Jefa, wearing pants, wearing men's suits. She was
always a woman.
She was always a woman. She was always a woman. And although it was very important when Sophia and Andy and I discussed the character and her arc, right? And episode 5, for example, is really impactful because she has reached the pinnacle, but she comes undone. She realizes she's just as paranoid as she was coming up. She's even more paranoid, right? And so I think that initially it would have been absolutely fun to put her in designer after designer piece and have it reflected on what she was wearing. But because we wanted to have it not be distracting, we dialed back a little bit. And then it was the people on the periphery that had a lot of the outwardly obvious material goods, apparel wise and style wise. And but she still looked money, right? And
that was important. That was important to the character. That was important to, I imagine, important to the real woman. Is that she had to look like money, or she wasn't worth much to the people she was trying to intimidate.
Exactly. And she definitely wanted her husband to look great. And she lived in a mansion on the water and got her sons and her husband any car they wanted. And and I think that across the board, still in dressing everyone, it really was still to maintain that grittiness, that underworld, that these people, even if they have as much money as a socialite or a high-level executive or something at that level, that they're still never really going to be accepted within that community. So this is within that world, and there's still a grittiness. 1 minute they may be at the top of their game at a fancy restaurant, right? At the most elegant salon. And later that day, they may stand there while someone's being killed, a rival is being murdered in front of them. And that is really what makes them different than someone at the level financially, but that isn't involved in a cartel.
Right. I'm imagining that Sophia herself had a pretty strong vision of how she wanted the character to look and wasn't afraid to share it. She had a lot of specific ideas, I'm sure, about the costumes?
I think, yes, she knows. She definitely had a firm idea of what she felt Griselda would be wearing, and a perspective, and asked Andy. And so, but the beautiful thing is it was very collaborative. And the other good thing is that we all were on the same page, right? So that worked really well. And I think that there's a great insight. I know that earlier on in the storyline, there are a pair of emerald earrings that some of the few pieces she managed to grab when she left Colombia, and that we see her wearing, and they symbolized a great deal, right? Originally in the story, they were supposed to be pawned, I think, so she could get some seed money and gotten back. And, so as the R&D was happening for the design team early on, it was instinctual to lean towards giant pendant, think Elizabeth Taylor, right? Like some sort of, but then I remember what resonated and what was brilliant was she said, and Andy said, they need to look like their money, but they can't be so big that maybe she'd get 100,000 for them, because then why would she choose this path? they need to look expensive enough that she can get a great amount of money, but not so much that you would think, well, then why doesn't she just sell all her jewelry, right? So all of those things, all of the direction aesthetically, I definitely trusted Sophia, and she is not just amazing performances, but she really, it was a holistically, she approached the character. It wasn't just in her performance. It was, as I said, in how she postures herself, and what she wears and how she wears those pieces. And the art of designing is really about giving your actors the tools they need to really inhabit and become that character. And so that's why you always have to listen and be open to any suggestions or perspectives.
I was hoping you would tell the earring story. Thank you. Because I'd read that before. And the earrings, you're right, are perfect, almost metaphorical for the whole way that the character plays it. But you also had to design clothes that could accommodate what the demands of the action sequences too, right? Including, the damage, stunts and everything. So, and those are clothes that you have to build up to be destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's painful. It's painful. I mean, it's we and I can say this from both perspectives of having been in charge of the budget and clearing and rationalizing expenditure and why we need to do this, and then creatively too. I can tell you that we were very fortunate to be given the resources we needed to have clean out all the vintage pieces locally and domestically, pristine vintage pieces, rental pieces, and then the custom made that we would either, maybe you find this amazing suit or beautiful blouse or just amazing 70s suit or 80s piece, and they rarely come in more than one. They just don't, right? And even if they do, maybe two. And so that's where you knock the pieces off, and you can also control it. You can control the color and the fabric and all of those items. And you certainly can't damage rentals. So we really utilized custom made, and the art is that you don't really see, you're not able to tell, aside from if it was really involved in a huge stunt scene. I don't think that it's really evident what pieces we slid in, right? With the custom made vintage reproductions slid alongside the real vintage pieces. And maybe it sometimes might even be the pants with the shirt and jacket were duplicated, and yet the pants weren't. And so it was a real task to do that. And we were fortunate. We aged them down. We dip dyed them. I mean, reprinted fabrics. So much was done to bring that story to the screen. And it was a lot, because there was a lot of people being killed left and right. Yeah, definitely.
But as you sort of alluded to earlier, also, Safowa, there probably weren't a lot of photos, I'm guessing, of Griselda Blanco, because it wasn't really good for business for her to be photographed that much. It wasn't like she wanted to be a celebrity. So was it difficult to match the reality of how she really looked? Did you have to just use your imagination sometimes?
Definitely. I mean, there really were limited research photos for us to use as a resource. And no matter what, Griselda, it was about transforming her within those parameters, but not trying to make her exactly that into the person. It was about the performance, right? And some of the prosthetics and such, and the wigs. And so yes, you had to use your imagination. You had to reverse engineer. You had to take from what you saw, the few photos you saw, and then merge that with all of the research and what others that may have had photos taken of them within that community, within that level. And you really had to use your imagination. But that's where the fun is. So, but yes, they definitely, her part of the world, definitely, they were not about having endless photos taken of them.
Last thing before we wrap here, Safowa, you came into this thinking, oh my God, I can't do this. I can't be a designer. This is too much. This is too giant a thing to bite off. Did that turn out to be the case, or did it turn out to just be as rewarding as you were hoping?
It was extremely rewarding. And you know, it was my first instinct to say, no, I can't pivot and do this. There's also because I had to hand off what I had on my plate. And it was overwhelming initially, but I was very fortunate to have a great team that I was able to bring on that supported me and logistically, and that I could count on. And I do think it ended up turning out. And at the time, though, you know, because really what you want is you want to be able to dedicate all your energy to prepping whatever the item is or whatever the project is creatively, and to have to pivot, it's just a different animal, but that's okay. It worked out. And it's easier when you step back and see it. You're able to see the big picture, and when you see the result on screen, that's when you can sort of breathe a sigh of relief and be happy. And this nomination is a cherry on top. So yes.
Well, let me tell you, it really did. You did a beautiful job. You know, it is all right there on the screen, and the nomination is well deserved. We're actually going to leave things there. Griselda streams on Netflix. Safowa Bright Bitzelberger, best of luck at the Emmys in September. And thanks for joining us at Gold Derby.
Thank you.